How did Sylvanas wipe out the Lich King and his army? In this video, we'll explain the lore you may have missed leading up to this cinematic, and why Sylvanas was seemingly able to pull off these feats of strength out of nowhere. You see, throughout all of BFA, and even Legion to an extent, one of the biggest criticisms about Sylvanas was that we didn't actually know what she was doing the entire time. She became the warchief in Legion and then kind of only did stuff in one of the leveling zones, and then wasn't really seen again. And in BFA, we constantly have to report to her, especially if you're a Sylvanas loyalist, and she's very cryptic about what her ultimate plan is, but very obviously has a plan. She just never told anyone what it was. And so far, with the reveal of the Shadowlands cinematic, we still don't know what her ultimate plan is, but we have a much better idea what it could possibly be, based on all the little nuggets of information we've been given throughout the last two expansions. Or this could even go as far back as the Wrath of the Lich King. Probably not. Blizzard said this story has ties all the way back to the end of Wrath, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's more likely that they retconned things to fit in with this new narrative that they thought up in Legion. So at the end of Wrath of the Lich King, Sylvanas killed herself by jumping off the top of Icecrown Citadel, impaling herself into the Serenite spikes below, which I thought during the Shadowlands cinematic, when Bolvar psychically picked up Serenite spikes and threw them at Sylvanas, was a really nice nod to Sylvanas' suicide. And after she killed herself, she found herself in hell and thought it was a terrible place. And the Valkyrie found her there and she made a bargain with them and she came back to life. That was basically the end of the story. However, they retconned that to the point where she probably met the jailer during this time as well, and then made the deal with him there. But we don't know exactly what kind of deal she made, because she obviously didn't get her power yet at this point. Because you see, immediately following this, the next time we have Sylvanas lore is in the Silverpine Forest quest chain, and at the end of the quest chain, she gets shot in the back of the head by Vincent Godfrey. And if she was the super powerful version that was fighting Bolvar in the cinematic, this would have never happened to her. Because this did kill her, and she had to be raised by the Valkyrie, who gave their lives in the process to bring her back. And this event was never really too suspicious, because most of the faction leaders in Warcraft could be killed if they got shot in the back of the head with a pistol. Now, Sylvanas is involved in the story here and there before Legion. During Mists of Pandaria, she helped in the rebellion with Garrosh, and even planned with her sister Varisa to kill Garrosh in prison, before her sister abandoned the plan at the last second. Then in Legion, she gets turned into the warchief after Vol'jin dies at the Broken Shore, and then goes to Stormheim to look for some magical lamp. And during the Stormheim adventures, players have to run around and kind of find Sylvanas, and they only ever catch glimpses of her until the very end, where you basically watch her try to subjugate the Prime Valkyrie, and then Genn Greymane comes in and ruins her time. And you're led to believe that her entire plan throughout Stormheim was just finding that lamp and finding the location of the Valkyrie with the perfect opportunity to enslave her. That way they would have an unlimited amount of reses for the Forsaken, instead of the limited amount they had with the few Valkyrie that served Sylvanas. And during the fight, Genn Greymane doesn't exactly win, but he is putting up a very good fight against Sylvanas. And Genn Greymane in lore isn't that much stronger than the average Worgen. However, Worgen are supposed to be pretty darn strong, as they themselves are a forbidden druid form that was said to be one of the strongest. And as a feat of strength, in the short story Elegy, Genn Greymane is looking for his wife in the burning city of Darnassus, and finds her under a heavy stone that a couple of night elves were trying to free her from. Genn sprang toward them, fear and fury whirling together in a maelstrom of strength, unlike any he had felt. He lifted the huge chunk of stone as if it were a piece of furniture, no heavier than one of those hideous end tables Mia loved so much, the ones they'd left to rot in Gilneas. Being able to lift that stone as effortlessly as he did proves that Genn is a pretty strong character, much stronger than average, and he knew he couldn't kill Sylvanas. Also, in this same novel, an Alliance character mentions a fact about her strength. One of the druids in Ashenvale had this to say about Sylvanas after seeing the Horde army marching into Ashenvale from the sky while he was in his druid bird form. He amended the thought to a certainty. Of course, she would be there. Her arrogance would not permit anyone else to take the glory. Besides, Sylvanas Windrunner was arguably the most powerful member of the Horde. And then in the novels leading up to Legion, particularly with A Good War, and with the Battle for Azeroth opening cinematic, we see Sylvanas being a tier higher in power than she's been shown in game before. In the cinematic, she destroys a siege machine and then kills a group of aligned soldiers with a Banshee scream, reminiscent of her Warcraft 3 days. During the Before the Storm book, when Sylvanas and Anduin meet up face to face before the exchange in the Arathi Highlands, Anduin notes in an internal monologue that Sylvanas could kill him with a single scream. Anduin did not need Charlemagne or even the more familiar mace, Fearbreaker. His weapon was the light. And of course, Sylvanas was deadly enough without a bow. All she needed to do was open her mouth and utter a wail, and he would perish. So he was in danger meeting her face to face like this. During A Good War, Sylvanas and Saurfang have a plan to invade Teldrassil and kill Malfurion. And the plan was always to have Sylvanas be the person to kill Malfurion, since they knew they wouldn't be able to do it basically any other way, as he's too strong for a normal soldier to fight him, or even a small squadron to fight him, and he's too smart to try to fight an entire army by himself. So he would just run away. And during the entire short story, Sylvanas is flying through the trees basically chasing after Malfurion. There's a particular scene in the book in which Malfurion is able to successfully set up a trap and hide in the middle of a town that the Horde had just occupied in order to attempt to kill Saurfang. And I'll read you out that section from the book to give you a really good indication of how strong Malfurion is, especially in comparison to Saurfang. He turned and flung himself back into the inn. An instant later, the ground shook as Malfurion's Stormrage landed where he had been standing. This is the end, Saurfang thought. As the sounds of chaos rose outside, the inn darkened. Malfurion's Stormrage stepped through the doorway, eyes fixed on Saurfang. 3 of the High Overlord's advisors charged him. "Stop!" Saurfang shouted. Malfurion moved, and the metallic claws strapped to his wrist made short work of the 2 orcs and the Blood Elf. He stepped forward, over their bodies. Morka grabbed Saurfang by the shoulder. "Run, High Overlord," she said. "We will give you time." No, they wouldn't. No more than a heartbeat. It was time to die with honor. "Take the maps," he whispered. "Get them to the Warchief." "Malfurion Stormrage, I challenge you to Mak'gora." The word sounded bizarre to his own ears. What use did a night elf have for an orcish duel to the death? It didn't matter. Malfurion was here for Saurfang. He would not pursue a bunch of advisors. Malfurion's eyes did not leave Saurfang's. "A duel, Saurfang?" he asked in a soft voice, soft like the eye of a storm, like the freshly dug soil of a grave. The Archdruid stepped forward calmly to where Saurfang waited. "Do you think I care in the slightest for a duel?" "You can run, if you're afraid," Saurfang said. He was buying time, that was all. The only victory Saurfang could hope for was for the latest Horde troop movements to be delivered to Sylvanas' hand so the battle might continue. "Or fight me, and see if I will fall." Malfurion said nothing. He raised his arms, the inn trembled. The wooden floors and ceilings creaked and groaned. When pieces of the inn started to fall around the orc's head, he accepted his death. Against a creature like Stormrage, there was no dishonor and failure. Saurfang simply had to meet his end without surrender. A sudden blast knocked him from his feet, dazing him. Saurfang closed his eyes. It is done. His hands went numb, tingling from the dark power that roared through the ruins of the inn. Dark power? Saurfang opened his eyes. Malfurion was not looking at him. His arms were crossed in front of his face as an arrow, wreathed in the shade of a violet smoke, exploded just before him. Emerald light rose against the darkness, and Malfurion charged to fight Sylvanas Windrunner, who had another arrow knocked and drawn at point-blank range. Saurfang would have leapt to his feet, but his legs wouldn't obey his commands. The inn collapsed on top of him, and he was surrounded by darkness and pain. But he wasn't dead. Not yet. Then, later on, Nathanos digs Saurfang out of the collapsed inn, and says this little bit of dialogue before that. If nothing else, the ungrateful masses of the Horde will finally give the Warchief the respect she has earned. Over and over again, Malfurion had come to crush groups of Horde, and she had intervened. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives had been saved because of her. This little passage does a good job of showing just how strong Malfurion is, where Saurfang thought he was so outmatched that he didn't even entertain the possibility that he could possibly win. And Malfurion killed 3 soldiers in an instant while staring at Saurfang the entire time. And Malfurion was constantly running away from Sylvanas whenever she showed up to fight him. And she also showed up to save Saurfang at the last second, which gives a really good indication of how strong Sylvanas is if she was chasing Malfurion away the entire time during the war. And when Malfurion and Sylvanas have a final battle, she is on the losing side of it, but only barely. And only because she was fighting Malfurion in his home field advantage in the middle of a forest. Nothing is more powerful than an Archdruid in the forest. And alone with seemingly no backup, as she had to chase him down to even get the fight. With everything stacked against her in the fight, it was close enough, to the point where Saurfang was able to intervene and help by throwing his axe into Malfurion's back. It only took minor intervention from an above-average soldier like Saurfang to turn the tides in Sylvanas' favor. Even in-game, they show little nuggets of her power, as during the War of the Thorns pre-expansion quest, when Malfurion summons the Wisp Wall to kill anyone who tries to cross through it, Sylvanas is able to single-handedly open up a small pocket using only her innate power, to allow a small squadron of soldiers to pass through. So when Saurfang challenged Sylvanas to Mak'gara, you can understand why Thrall immediately told Saurfang that he would die in the battle, and why Saurfang did not disagree with him. So during the battle, when Sylvanas easily beats him and taunts him the entire time, it wasn't really a surprise to anyone who had read the stories. Someone who was flying around the forest chasing down someone like Malfurion could obviously very easily defeat Saurfang in a one-on-one combat. But then at the end of the fight, she blasts Saurfang with basically a Kamehameha of shadow energy, something that she hadn't done before, and something that Lorthamar mentioned he'd never seen her do before, and wasn't even sure what kind of magic it was, which is a pretty big deal for the leader of the Blood Elves, who are all about magic. So when she faces off against Bolvar, we find out that she had gotten even stronger since her time before Teldrassil, and Bolvar himself is no pushover. He's no Arthas the Lich King, mind you. Arthas was way stronger than Bolvar, particularly because he had the Frostmourne, and Bolvar kind of gave away the last fragments of Frostmourne to Frost Death Knights and Legion, as they used those to create their artifact weapon. And the power of the Lich King was always in how strong their army was, and not really the power level of the Lich King himself. I forget where it was said, but it was in an interview or some kind of Q&A, where Blizzard basically said that individually, the Thunder King was stronger than the Lich King Arthas, but that if the two of their armies would fight each other, Arthas would come out on top. And Bolvar did have his undead army with him, it's just Sylvanas kind of took them all out off screen, and then had a one-on-one fight with Bolvar himself. And even then, she didn't really kill him, she just kind of constrained him with her new dark magic. And they did foreshadow this new power level beforehand. They showed her making dark deals in Stormhigh, the details of which were never told. They showed her making deals throughout BFA, stuff with Xal'atath, Ashara, Ashvane, and we never learned the exact details of any of those things. All of those deals were made off screen, and we were simply made aware that there was something going on. We saw her flying through the trees chasing down Malfurion and fighting him as an equal. And we saw Malfurion killing groups of Horde soldiers by himself, which establishes a pretty decent baseline power level, as there were many more moments of Malfurion just killing groups of Horde soldiers by himself that I didn't read in this video. We saw her blast Saurfang with a stream of dark energy, and then we had important magic people comment on how powerful she had grown. And all of this was laid out before the Shadowlands cinematic came out, so it should be very obvious to anyone who had been following Bolvar and Sylvanas' story that it's not a surprise for Sylvanas to come out on top in that battle. But the average WoW player barely reads quest texts in-game, so of course all of this would have come as a shock. People assume Bolvar is literally as strong as Arthas the Lich King, who was sought out to be the champion by Ner'zhul because of his gifts in combat, and he still had Frostmourne with him. So, of course, if you assumed Bolvar had the exact same levels of power as Arthas at full power, and you assume Sylvanas was still as strong as she was when she got shot in the back of the head at the start of Cataclysm, then I can totally see why you'd be upset by the cinematic. Blizzard has actually done a pretty good job of setting everything up. It's just you kind of have to seek this stuff out in order to learn all this background information. So unless Blizzard is super obvious about their lore, and basically yells their characters' main motivations and power levels at the top of their lungs during a main cinematic, most people won't know what's going on. But that would be a symptom of bad writing, and it's a good thing Blizzard doesn't do that very much. They're a little bit more subtle than that. Occasionally they'll do just that though, because they know who their player base is. And with things we've learned at BlizzCon and during developer interviews, we basically learned that they soft retconned the Helm of Domination and Frostmourne to be more powerful than they were originally. You see, in the original lore, Kil'jaeden basically created the Helm of Domination and Frostmourne and just gave it to the Dreadlords to prime Azeroth for a Legion invasion. And the Scourge was kind of like an appetizer for the main dish, which was the Legion coming in. So what they did was change it so those two things were actually artifacts that were recovered from the Shadowlands by the Legion. It doesn't really change established lore, as these two things were never really given too much lore in the first place about their origins. It just kind of retroactively makes them more important, and people already thought they were super important to begin with anyway, so it's a pretty good retcon. And Sylvanas has been growing stronger due to all the deaths during the Fourth War. So after she burned down Tedrasil, after the wars in Zandalar and Kulturas, the people who died to Ajara and the many more who died to Inzoth, if Sylvanas gains a portion of power based on the amount of people who've died in this timeline, then it's real easy to see why she's gotten as strong as she has. So many people died during the Fourth War that it's now known as the Blood War in-game. But we don't know the exact details to this, or what her ultimate plan is. But then again, she's been doing all kinds of things for the past 2 expansions without us knowing what's going on. So I'm really excited to see, finally, what she's been doing for the past 2 expansions. They've been setting her up very heavily, and seeing the Shadowlands cinematic was a big reveal moment to lore nerds, because the number one complaint about Sylvanas is that we don't know what her plan is, and she's been doing all of this 4D chess stuff for some kind of super secret plan that they gave no indication of what that plan might be. So it was nice to see why she kept everything secret, and it really put a lot of things into perspective, and I thought it was handled pretty well. Alright, and that's the end of the video. If you liked the video, make sure to like, spread it around to everyone else who might be asking these questions. And also, did you know only 21% of people who watch my videos are subscribed? So, if you like the video, want to see more, make sure to subscribe. If you have any questions, concerns, pointing out my inaccuracies, I'll be responding to all of that in the comments.